You see in front of you Unit 3. You should have already downloaded the note sheet into Notability so that you can kind of toggle between the two here. We'll try to get through this PowerPoint fairly quickly. Simple sentences contain one independent clause. An independent clause, the most important thing to remember about that is that it can stand on its own. A clause is a subject and a verb. This differs from a phrase. We've talked about appositive phrases, we've talked about prepositional phrases, we've talked about verb phrases. So we have lots of phrases. They do not contain verbs, however. We're looking at clauses which contain a subject and a verb. So on your note sheet, you should fill out that simple sentences contain one independent clause. You're filling in the word one. A clause is a subject and a verb is what you're filling in there. An independent clause can, and then you're filling in stand on its own. The example here is Anthony played games on his smartphone. We see that the prepositional phrases are already crossed out. We can see there's even a direct object in the first one. Ben ate and napped. If we could even take out in the afternoon, we can take out on Saturday, and we have simple sentences. You'll notice even if we have two subjects, we still have a simple sentence. And we can have two verbs, but it's still a simple sentence because the subjects and the verbs in this case are compound. And you can see that that's the rule. Compound sentences contain two or more independent clauses, and this is usually where we get into our use of conjunctions. Sometimes we can also use semicolons, and you'll learn how to use those in the screencast. The barista topped the latte with whipped cream. That's one independent clause. Comma, conjunction. She handed it to the customer. That's our second independent clause. So you'll see that both clauses could stand on their own. We could have two separate choppy sentences here, but we are combining them with a comma and a conjunction. You have two options. You can use the comma conjunction. You'll notice here the little chart of fanboys. This reminds you about what your conjunctions are, and, but, or, for, nor, so, and yet, but you can remember in the fanboys order. You can also use a semicolon as well between the two independent clauses. And you'll see the winning team is group 1, semicolon, they will receive Jolly Ranchers. And these signal the end of one independent clause, but they tell you the second clause is related to the first one. A common mistake here is to try to use semicolons without two independent clauses. So for example, some people will make an error by using a dependent clause and using a semicolon. You can't do that. They can only go between two independent clauses. Now our third kind of sentence, a complex sentence, contains one independent clause and one or more dependent clause. Now by the way, make sure that you have gone back to your note sheet, filled in the conjunctions, filled in the notes on that part of it, and then you'll also see on the note sheet the common sentence errors, the run-on sentences, the comma splices, and the fragments. It's really important for you to look at those. You'll see those errors marked on your writing a lot, well, hopefully not too much, and that's definitely the kind of thing that we want to avoid. Okay, well, an independent clause can stand on its own. A dependent clause cannot and must be paired with an independent clause. So we have a couple of sentences here, or a couple of sentence pieces. Since you have done so well on the quiz, that's a dependent clause that cannot stand up by itself. I cannot walk up to you in the hall and say, since you've done so well on the quiz, and walk away and have you think that I am, okay. We will take a field trip. I definitely could come up and say that to you and it would make sense. So it is definitely an independent clause. Our dependent clauses start with either a subordinating conjunction, I like to call these signal words, or even a relative pronoun. Here's a list of really common subordinating conjunctions. This list is also on your note sheet for you. And we also have a list of the relative pronouns. These are going to also signal a dependent clause. This is critical for you to look over these lists carefully and try to remember these words so that when you see them in the sentence you think, oh, there's a dependent clause. Amanda, who was on time for everything, arrived first to the party. Now the independent clause here is interrupted by a dependent clause. Amanda arrived first to the party is our independent clause. Who was on time for everything is our dependent clause. This modifies Amanda. It goes back and describes Amanda. If is a subordinated conjunction that starts a dependent clause in this case. If the dependent clause comes first, comma, it is followed by a comma. If you do not need a comma if the dependent clause comes second. See, no comma is needed here because, oops, I'm really messing this one up, because the dependent clause comes after. This is one of the main comma rules that you will see on our board in the room too. Now since it has stopped raining, comma, we will go outside for AT. You'll notice again, dependent clause is first, since is a signal word. We will go outside for AT is an independent clause. So every sentence must have an independent clause. Every sentence does not have to have a dependent clause. However, your writing will be more complex, obviously, if you can learn to combine these effectively. You'll notice when we flip the sentences, you no longer need the comma. If the dependent clause comes in the middle, we usually use commas. The only reason we would not is if it's a necessary dependent clause, and we'll be covering that at a later time. All right, well, make sure that you complete your note sheet. You'll see more details on the note sheet about relative pronouns, conjunctive adverbs, wherein you can use a semicolon with your conjunctive adverb. There's a new sentence pattern there for you. And you'll see types of signal words that join clauses, just depending on whether or not you're trying to illustrate a contrast or cause and effect or location. Now for the really advanced writers, you will see the correlative conjunctions. These are conjunctions that are used in pairs, and you may have tried to use some of these in the past. So you'll combine your sentences more, have longer, more complex sentences as you start to use these. The last piece of the note sheet is simply just an optional practice. At least look at the different kinds of sentence patterns, especially those of you who are constantly getting the short, choppy sentences, tri-sentence combining comments on your papers, because you might only be using sentence type number 1, whereas I would like to see you getting to sentence types number 4, 5, 6, etc. Okay. Make sure that you complete practice 1 after you have completed the entire note sheet. And get ready for your quiz. There is online practice on Blended Schools where you can continue to study this topic further.